I'm Chris Wallace. The firestorm over the deal to trade 5 Taliban leaders for Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. Today, setting the record straight on what we know and the questions still unanswered.
We saw an opportunity and we seized it, and I make no apologies for that.
Backlash from both the right and left on the president's decision to go it alone.
The transfers went ahead with no consultation, totally not following the law.
We have now created an incentive for the enemies of the United States to try to capture American men and women in uniform in an effort to exchange them.
We'll ask former U.S. Attorney General Michael Mukasey whether President Obama broke the law by not notifying Congress, and talk with retired 4-star General Jack Keane about the military principle, leave no soldier behind. Then, as more details of Bergdahl's disappearance and captivity come to light, growing calls for a full investigation.
He voluntarily left us all behind to go do his own thing.
This man has to be accountable for his actions.
We'll sit down with parents who believe their son was killed searching for Bergdahl, and a member of his unit who says Bergdahl is absolutely a deserter. Plus, was that Rose Garden victory lap just the latest sign of incompetence in the White House? Our Sunday panel weighs in. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. There has been fierce criticism this week of the swap of 5 Taliban leaders for Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. There are now more questions than ever about how he was captured by the enemy and how the White House handled his release. Did Bergdahl serve with honor, or was he a deserter, even a traitor? Did we give up too much to get him back? We're dedicating this hour to try to sort out the facts. We begin with Fox team coverage. Catherine Herridge puts the swap for those 5 Gitmo detainees into context. But first, Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin on how Bergdahl is recovering and how he became a Taliban prisoner. Jennifer.
Chris, Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl remains at a military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany. We're told he is physically sound, no sign of chronic or fatal disease, despite the administration saying that concern over his declining health was the reason they moved swiftly to exchange prisoners for his release. Military investigators are standing by to debrief him as soon as the doctors and psychologists say that he is ready. There are still questions about why Bergdahl left his base in eastern Afghanistan on June 30th, 2009. He had left his base at least once before. Defense officials confirmed that Bergdahl did try to escape from the Taliban at least once, and after attempting to do so a year into his captivity, his captors confined him to a cage and to solitary confinement for periods of time. A 2010 Army investigation into his disappearance concluded he willfully walked off base, but stopped short of declaring him a deserter because they could not establish his intent. Bergdahl left his weapon and body armor at the base and took with him only a few personal items. According to cables published by WikiLeaks shortly after Bergdahl disappeared, quote, an American soldier with a camera is looking for someone who speaks English. Unit mates who indicated that Bergdahl left behind a letter explaining why he was leaving may have been referring to emails Bergdahl sent home to his parents, published in Rolling Stone magazine in 2012, in which Bergdahl wrote, quote, I am ashamed to be an American, and the title of U.S. soldier is just the lie of fools. I am sorry for everything. The horror that is America is disgusting. According to the emails obtained by Rolling Stone, Bergdahl's father responded in an email, obey your conscience. It was the last time he and his son communicated before he left his base. Bergdahl still has not spoken to his parents, according to U.S. officials. Chris?
Jennifer, thank you. Now, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on the potential repercussions of releasing the Taliban 5. Catherine.
Chris, the number of detainees who are suspected or confirmed of returning to the battlefield is nearly 1 in 3, but a former defense official believes the number is much higher because the U.S. government only knows they've gone back to terrorism when they are killed or captured.
I'm not surprised that certain detainees who are highly radicalized go back to the fight, even after they're held in continued detention in another country or even go through a rehabilitation program.
All 5 men were transferred by the military to Guantanamo in 2002, among them senior Taliban commanders, some with links to al-Qaeda and others associated with the worst massacres in Afghanistan. Some defenders of the swap say they have been out of the fight for a decade.
The idea that you're an old man, so you're out of the game, doesn't really mean much. These guys are rock stars in the jihadi world, especially now that they've survived Guantanamo.
Supporters of the swap point to Israel, a country tough on terrorism. In 2011, Israel traded 1,027 prisoners for Gilad Shalit, held by Hamas. But some analysts argue the Jewish state is a unique case. It puts a premium on its military because every citizen serves. Fox News has reported from the detention camps a dozen times, and while the Bush administration transferred more than 500 detainees, less than 90 have been transferred since President Obama took office. The Taliban 5 swap may have blown any remaining goodwill on Capitol Hill to close the camps.
The political reality here is that this is the poster child of unintended consequences. Now, it has had the exact opposite effect, that it's making it harder for them, I think, at least in the short term, to do transfers.
Some Republicans on the Hill are calling for open hearings, with Senator Lindsey Graham saying impeachment is on the table if the president releases more prisoners from Gitmo without congressional approval. Contrary to administration statements in an interview with Bloomberg TV, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein said she'd seen no credible evidence the Taliban would have killed Bergdahl if details of the agreement had leaked. Chris.
Catherine, thank you. There are so many aspects to this case, and we want to begin with the legal questions. Joining us now from New York, former U.S. Attorney General and former federal judge, Michael Mukasey. Judge, should President Obama, as Commander-in-Chief, order a full investigation of Bowe Bergdahl's actions after he walked off that base, and a court-martial if that's what the facts lead to?
Well, I think the question of a court-martial is really up to the Army, and the Army should act swiftly. There's no reason why this case can't be presented within 6 months. The fact is that there's been an investigation into the circumstances of his disappearance, as your report indicated. We know what he did. The question of why he did it is also, I think, pretty obvious. The question is what he did afterwards. And you can't wait to try a case until you know absolutely everything about everything. We know enough.
Judge Mukasey, from what you know so far, is Bergdahl guilty of leaving his base without permission, being absent from his post? Is he guilty of being a deserter? Is he guilty of being a defector? And after 5 years of captivity, and some people initially said, well, that's enough, should he face the appropriate punishment if he is found guilty?
The question of punishment is something that comes after a court-martial. I think the question of whether he suffered enough should not at all relate to the question of whether he gets tried. Desertion is a very serious offense. It carries a penalty, if it's done in wartime, that includes possibly the death penalty. At the end of World War II, we executed a U.S. soldier in January of 1945 for desertion. So it's a very serious offense. It carries a lifetime penalty even if it's done in peacetime, because that is a very critical matter, the continued reliability of soldiers.
So you believe the death penalty should at least be on the table for Bergdahl?
No, I'm not saying the death penalty should be on the table for Bergdahl. That case at the end of World War II was virtually unique in modern times. What I'm saying is that is some indication of the seriousness with which the military does view and should view desertion.
Let's talk about another legal issue, and that is the one of congressional notification. When the President signed the Defense Authorization Act last year, it contained a provision that the administration must notify Congress not later than 30 days before the transfer or release of a prisoner from Guantanamo. Question, did the President break the law, or was that requirement an unconstitutional infringement on his executive powers?
Well, yes to both. He broke the law, but I believe that the law itself is unconstitutional. Article 2 makes him the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. This man, these people were in the custody of the Armed Forces. It gives him plenary authority to conduct foreign affairs. And to the extent that that statute purports to restrict his Article 2 power, I think it's unconstitutional. And he said so at the time that he signed it.
President Obama has been very clear that he would like to close Guantanamo, has said so from, I believe, the second day of his administration. Does he have the unilateral authority to do so?
He has the authority to do so, but the question is under what circumstances he does so. When Lindsey Graham called for impeachment being on the table, I think what he was disclosing and making clear is that whether you impeach somebody doesn't depend on whether they violate the law. The president can stay within his lawful powers and still commit an impeachable offense. He has the power to pardon anybody he wants. If he decided tomorrow to pardon everybody in the U.S. prison system, that would be perfectly lawful. But I think it would also raise serious questions about whether he should continue in office. The same is true of a wholesale release of dangerous people.
You wrote an article for the Washington Post that appeared Friday in which you called the president's decision ghastly and at another point grotesque for a judge. That's pretty strong language, sir.
Well, I was never known to pull punches even when I was on the bench, but I'm not a judge now, so I can call them as I see them. And why do you feel that those words are appropriate? I think those words were really applied in the column to the scene in the Rose Garden, where having made this questionable decision, the president was essentially taking a victory lap, which I thought was frankly absurd. Judge Mukasey, we want to thank you for clearing up some of the legal questions involved here. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. Good to see you. Of course, all this is happening while we're still at war in Afghanistan. To explore the military side of the controversy, retired four-star General Jack Keane, former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. And General, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Always good to be here, Chris.
We've heard a lot from the politicians this week about the military principle, leave no soldier behind. Is that true even in a case like this where Bowe Bergdahl at least walked off his post and may have deserted?
Yes, definitely. If he defected, that would be another matter. We would not go after him, and certainly with no rescue, and there'd be no negotiations for him. But this is still a United States soldier, and we want to bring him home, and we want a full accounting of what took place and his behavior. Everyone in the administration certainly knows that he deserted his post. That is a fact. They're not going to make a lot of statements about that because, frankly, we want this soldier to come home, be interrogated by an expert, and let's get all the facts on the table. And if it drives us to a court-martial, so be it. But we don't want him right now in Landstuhl with a lawyer because we're making statements that would have to protect him in his due process.
Well, you talk about one thing if he's a deserter, another if he's a defector. We got reports from James Rosen this week based on intel reports that were given to the military at the time that indicated that Bergdahl did try to escape at least twice, was severely punished, put in a cave, but that at a later point during his 5 years of captivity that he declared himself a warrior for jihad. How does the military sort that out?
The primary evidence we're going to use is certainly him. And we do have a single source reporting on everything you just described. We have multi-source reporting is the process we go through. We want to confirm a single source, particularly human sources with paid informants, which are largely what this is. Multi-sources have confirmed that he did escape. We haven't been able to confirm that there's been multiple escapes, or we have not been able to confirm, which is a violation of the code of conduct, that he sought favor from the enemy, which the single source indicates he did, or that he was in fact collaborating with the enemy, which the single source indicates that he did. An experienced, sophisticated interrogator will get to the bottom of this, I'm absolutely convinced.
There has been, I don't have to tell you, a firestorm of criticism this week over comments made by National Security Advisor Rice last Sunday on another show. Here is what she said then and how she tried to clean it up on Friday.
He served the United States with honor and distinction. What I was referring to is the fact that this was a young man who volunteered to serve his country in uniform at a time of war. That is itself a very honorable thing.
Do Bergdahl's actions, as you understand them, meet any military definition of honor and distinction? And in this past week, how do the military leaders you've spoken to regard this, the event, the swap, the decision to bring back Bergdahl, and the way in which it was rolled out by the administration?
Yes, certainly, yes. I mean, the fact that a citizen volunteers, becomes a soldier, becomes a paratrooper, goes to combat as a result of that, has an unblemished record, is a very good soldier, and then deserts his post and, in a sense, betrays all his comrades, that trumps all that previous behavior. So that is a distinction in of itself, and he has to be held accountable for that. And certainly the United States military, in looking at behavior like that, are not going to tolerate it. And the way soldiers feel about that, particularly his teammates, there's one word, and that's betrayed.
And how have the military leaders you've talked to this week, I know you're in close touch with a lot of folks still in the Pentagon, how do they view the way this week has rolled out?
They're outraged by the fact that the president at the Rose Garden ceremony was actually promoting an event, and in terms of public relations, and then taking his family, who, by the way, the military had advised to maintain a very low profile, and they had been maintaining a low profile, Chris, for years. And then to put them in front of the cameras like that and begin a celebration, I think that created not only anguish among those who were his teammates and those who may have lost their lives in rescuing him, but senior military leaders looked at that and just shook their head and said, why are we doing something like that?
Let's talk about another aspect of that, and that is the Taliban Five, the 5 detainees, Taliban leaders, who we swapped for Bergdahl. Defenders of the administration, we have them up on the screen here, say these are 5 graybeards who have been off the battlefield for more than a decade. And President Obama says that the risk is acceptable. Here he is.
We have released, both under my administration and previous administrations, a large number of former Taliban fighters, some of whom returned to the battlefield. But by definition, you don't do prisoner exchanges with your friends. You do them with your enemies.
General, realistically, how big a threat are these 5 men?
Okay, well, first of all, any exchange where we're trying to get back someone who's held in captivity, the deal will naturally favor those who are holding that person in captivity. That's without giving. You already emphasized that with what Prime Minister Netanyahu had to do. Secondly, these 5 Taliban guys are obviously everything that people are saying they are. The fact of the matter is that there's no conditions that are mitigating what's taking place here. They should not have access to internet, phones, visitors. They should be restricted. They should be on a military base in Qatar, and international observers keeping track of that. As we speak right now, they are reintegrating, at least with the leadership of the Taliban, on the phone, on the internet. They'll have visitors from them. So they'll eventually come back into the leadership fold of the Taliban. Make no mistake about that. The fact of the matter is, what is the risk? We're going to be down to less than 10,000 next year, U.S. troops. We're going to be down to less than 5,000 the year after that when these guys are supposedly going to go back. The fact of the matter is there is some risk there. The greater risk, though, Chris, is to all the radical Islamic movements around the world who see what the United States is willing to do to make an exchange, and that makes U.S. people, soldiers and also civilians, vulnerable to radical Islamists to grab somebody.
Finally, we have less than a minute left. The White House was defending its actions this week, saying, look, this is the kind of messy thing that happens at the end of the war. But as you point out, it isn't the end of the war. We're going to have 9,800 troops there next year, and half that all the way to the end of 2016. Is the White House being premature in talking about the end of the war?
Well, I think they've wanted to talk about the end of the war going all the way back to when he escalated the surge forces into the war. And I think this release and the way the announcement is handled is all part of the president's desire to end this war. And it's been quite inappropriate in how this has obviously been handled.
General Keane, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. Always a pleasure to talk with you, sir.
Yeah, good talking to you, Chris.
What do you think of the prisoner swap? Join the conversation on Facebook with other FNS viewers. Coming up, what really happened in Afghanistan 5 years ago. We'll get a personal perspective when we talk with a former member of Bergdahl's unit and parents who believe their son was killed searching for him. That's next. Some of the toughest reaction to the release of Bowe Bergdahl has come from people who were personally involved in his story. Members of his unit say he served without honor or distinction, and parents of some fallen soldiers say their sons would be alive if Bergdahl had not gone missing from his post. Joining us now from California, Josh Cornelison, who was a medic in Bergdahl's unit. And here in Washington, Cheryl Brandis and Ken Lucioni, parents of Private First Class Matthew Martinek, who was killed on patrol in Afghanistan in 2009. One of the reasons there has been so much controversy this week is because the Obama administration has pushed back against some of your claims. Here is Defense Secretary Hagel on whether soldiers were actually killed looking for Bowe Bergdahl. Here he is.
I do not know of specific circumstances or details of U.S. soldiers dying as a result of efforts to find and rescue Sergeant Bergdahl.
Cheryl, the Pentagon points out that Matthew was killed in September, more than 2 months after Bergdahl disappeared, and they question the connection. Your reaction?
They didn't find him. They still kept looking for him. That's what they were doing. I guess when it first happened, they shut everything down, but the missions kept up, trying to look for him and rescue him.
Ken, the military points out that 5 soldiers were killed in the 3 months after Bergdahl disappeared, and 8 soldiers in that part of Afghanistan were killed in the same 3 months the previous year. I don't think they're in any way trying to diminish your loss of your son, but they are pushing back on this idea that there's a link and that somehow this is being blamed on Bergdahl's desertion.
I'll say 2 things to that. First off, the people that were there, the people in Matt's platoon, the people in Matt's company, all say that this was the mission. Nobody's coming out saying, well, no, it wasn't the mission. Second, if he worked for me, the statement that was just made,
you're talking about Secretary Hagel?
Correct. As a businessman, I would say, you're in charge. If you don't know, then you shouldn't be in charge. They know. American people know that this is not being handled properly. The Army knows what went on. And what's frustrating is, why not tell the truth? I mean, whether or not he deserted, was captured in a battle, slept-walked, they would have had to go after him. Now, the fact that he voluntarily left hurts us, because we may not have been here if he didn't do that. But this is the confusing thing. The truth is not that bad.
Josh, the whole point of this hour is to try to get at the truth. You were a friend of their son, of Matthew. Take us back to the weeks and months after Bergdahl disappeared. How much did that affect and change what your unit and Matthew's unit were doing?
After Bowe Bergdahl purposely and willfully walked away, every single mission that we did was tilted, was focused on finding Bergdahl. Maybe not every single mission was kicking down a Kalat door because we had intel that Bergdahl was there, but we were finding people, we were finding either locals that had said they had information about where Bowe Bergdahl was, or maybe we were just trying to go and talk with the locals to see if they knew anything about Bowe Bergdahl. But every single mission after Bergdahl left was tilted towards finding Bowe Bergdahl, every single mission.
Josh, members of your unit, including you, have been speaking out since Bergdahl was released, and the administration has also been pushing back at some of the comments that you and your colleagues have made. Here is a spokeswoman for the State Department on some of the comments your unit has made. Take a look.
You've had all this time, 5 years, to determine whether he was a deserter or not. That's a long time.
He's been in captivity, Lucas. I think he's probably the person who knows best what happened on that night.
Well, I think his squad mates have the best indication what happened that night.
I don't think that's the case.
I don't think that's the case. Josh, your reaction to hearing somebody from the State Department's podium say that in effect you guys don't know what went on, and some on background have been tougher, talking about smearing Bergdahl or swift-boating Bergdahl.
I don't know what people want to, or what certain people want to hear. I was there. Everybody else that I've been, that we've been talking with or to or whatever, there's been 6 of us primarily. We were there. This isn't some story that we're making up. We were there for the night Bergdahl left. We were there for the morning when we realized he wasn't there. We were there for the following 90 days of absolute just agony that Bergdahl put us through. This isn't second or third-hand reports or accounts. We were there running missions every single day to try and find Bowe Bergdahl.
The Army asked all of you to sign non-disclosure agreements while Bergdahl was in captivity, I guess because obviously they didn't want you saying things that might endanger him. Did you sign one of those non-disclosure agreements, and why are you speaking out now, sir?
I did. The main reason I'm speaking out now is because over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of kind of mixed details about what happened with Bowe Bergdahl, and the American public needs to be educated that Bowe Bergdahl is not a hero, that he did not serve with honor or any kind of distinction, that he is a deserter that purposefully and willfully walked away from his post, and he needs to be held 100% accountable for putting the lives of not only myself and my platoon and my unit and everybody in eastern Afghanistan in danger. He needs to be held accountable for that.
Summing up here, and Cheryl, let me start with you. What part, and I know this must be deeply emotional for you, among other things, it brings up Matthew's loss in 2000, and what part of this week since Bergdahl was released, what part of this week disturbs you the most?
I guess as a mom, I don't want to see another mom go through this. Releasing the 5 Taliban, extremely dangerous for our country. Finding out that we're going to be minimizing our troops over there come 2016, 5,000 troops, that's a massacre waiting to happen. That's not good. Especially, that gives these Taliban leaders a year to prepare, to take back Afghanistan. And when they do, it's going to be hard. It's going to be they're going to be going for it. This is bad.
Ken, final thought. What about this week? All aspects of it.
Well, it tears the scabs, and it was like it happened yesterday, and it hurts. And when Cheryl said, we don't want another mother to go through this, to be treated this way, we're just regular people. And, you know, so many people don't keep up with what's going on. They need to understand they could be the next story where something happens and they're not told the truth. The American people need to know the truth about Bowe Bergdahl. They need to know the truth about the decision to let 5 of the worst go when 12 years of U.S. troops, foreign troops, people risk their lives, families' lives have been upended. To take those type of people away and either put them away or kill them, and now we say we were only kidding and let them go. There's a big problem here, and this is why we're doing this. Matthew was an honorable person. Everybody loved him, and we are doing this for Matthew. We're doing it for the soldiers like Josh.
Ken, Cheryl, Josh, thank you all so much for coming in today, sharing your stories with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
How could the president and top advisors have miscalculated so badly about what Susan Rice at first called a joyous day? Our Sunday group weighs in next. Plus,
we also made an ironclad commitment to bring our prisoners of war home. That's who we are as Americans. The main concern is that we had to act fast in a delicate situation that required no publicity.
President Obama started out last weekend celebrating the prisoner swap for Bowe Bergdahl, but by Friday he was being forced to defend the decision and his failure to notify Congress. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Syndicated columnist George Will, Mara Liasson from National Public Radio, Steve Hayes of the Weekly Standard, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Well, George, this was always going to be tricky. How do you defend releasing, making a prisoner swap for a soldier who walked away from his post, at the very least, deserted, one could argue, at the most? But as you look back over this week, how did it become such a mess for the administration?
First, by doing it in the Rose Garden, by making it a moment of mellow national celebration, when in fact it was surrounded with ambiguities that were bound to come out sooner or later. So if this had been announced as part of the tidying up at the end of conflict in Afghanistan, that would have been one thing. Then they began by saying, the president just said, time was of the essence. Well, time was of the essence supposedly because a video, 5-month-old video, showed that his health was in immediate peril.
Which they first saw back in January.
Correct. That's it. So 5 months ago they said this. Mr. Hagel repeated, Secretary Hagel repeated that he was in peril. Dianne Feinstein said there's no evidence, no reason whatever to believe that. So you had conflict from the start. It looks as though there were two other motives here for the administration, policy motives. One is if you can get rid of the 5 worst offenders at Guantanamo, it makes it easier to close Guantanamo because the rest seems minor and trivial. And the third is that this was an attempt to reach out to the moderates and the Taliban. I'll leave it up to you to decide if that's an oxymoron, but it's back to Cold War thinking. We were always trying to propitiate the moderates in the Kremlin so that the hawks in the Kremlin, we try and manipulate our enemies, sometimes to not very demonstrable effect. But that's what happened. We had a plethora of reasons, none of which seemed satisfactory.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Jim Handy. He writes, when is the president going to invite the families of those killed looking for Bergdahl to the Rose Garden? Mara, you spent a lot of time covering the White House. Do they realize how tone-deaf, even offensive, the Rose Garden ceremony was, and how do they explain it?
You know, a lot of Democrats I've talked to agree that the Rose Garden was a mistake. They should have made a statement. The strong and silent approach would have been better. But when you talk to the White House, they said they had to do it. The president was leaving the next day. The parents just happened to be in town, which is true. They were here for Memorial Day. The parents have been in regular contact with White House officials for years. And they decided to do this. They said the president had to own this decision. It was his. I also think that, as in many cases before, they just overspin things, try to milk too much benefit for the president out of it. They knew it was going to be controversial. And I think that of all people, Harry Reid, who usually isn't considered a great communicator, I think said it better than President Obama did. It doesn't matter if he was sick or his health was in danger. It doesn't matter the circumstances of his departure. We had to get him back. Those are the firmest grounds for the president to stand on. I did it because we leave no one behind, period.
Steve, the White House has taken to summarizing the president's foreign policy as don't do stupid stuff, although they use another word for stuff. Did they do stupid stuff this week?
Yeah, I think the real problem here, I mean, I agree with you that the Rose Garden announcement was tone deaf. There are all sorts of problems with the sort of atmospherics here. The problem is the substance. The problem here is the administration's case about Bowe Bergdahl has fallen apart. The administration's case about these Guantanamo detainees has fallen apart. It's very clear that there are not minor conflicts between the story that the administration sold, but the story that the intelligence officials have provided in classified briefings and elsewhere. As George pointed out, the health issues that the administration made front and center, their first arguments about Bowe Bergdahl, Secretary Hagel said, we had to save his life. Based on this video from 5 months ago, you have Dianne Feinstein and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper saying there's no intelligence to support that claim. Then on the Guantanamo detainees, you have the same thing. You have the administration certifying that these are no longer a threat to U.S. national security, that this isn't a problem. And yet you have in private briefings the National Intelligence Officer for South Asia testifying that 4 out of 5 of them are likely, nearly certain to go back to fighting again. You have James Clapper, again, in private testimony. This is not what he and the administration is saying in public, saying, in effect, these guys are going to go back and fight. We're returning fighters to the enemy, not fighters, but commanders to the enemy while the war is still going on. That's the problem.
Juan, you like to take the other side in these discussions. Is there any part of how this has been handled and the actual substance of the decisions that you want to defend?
I don't think it's a matter of defending, Chris. I think it's a matter of us as Americans not getting lost in the, I think, troubling optics of the White House ceremony. Or, you know, Steve Hayes does a great job of reporting on all this stuff, but I think it's, again, you can't get lost in the fog for the key, very clear principle. The clear principle is we don't leave soldiers behind. And at the moment, I think what's necessary here, I'm reminded this Sunday morning of the story of the prodigal son, that you don't make judgments as you have the opportunity to bring that child back. America should be loving this child at this moment. Obviously, we don't know why he left. We think he's a troubled person. We think he may have lost a sense of America's mission. All true. But the idea is we don't leave people in the enemy's hands. The enemy saw him as an American soldier. That young man suffered. He was caged, Chris. His parents suffered. And yet people want to argue about the father's beard. They want to say they shouldn't have a parade. Let the military decide. The military is best positioned, not us sitting here on this panel, and not all the political people on the Republican side who have flip-flopped, Chris, in the most craven way. Unbelievable.
No.
Yeah, we got to bring
the details of this
back
matter.
in
No.
any way we
They
can.
didn't flip-flop. The details of this really matter. The details of these Guantanamo detainees, even if you accept the principle, I think you made the case very well, you accept the principle that we want to bring everybody back, the details of this transfer matter. These 5 guys, that makes this, I think, very difficult for some of the people who wanted to bring Bergdahl back in theory, very difficult for them to swallow. And on your second point, look, I think you're right. There are some people who have jumped to conclusions here and want to say that he was an enemy collaborator, and we know this right now. We don't know that. But at the same time, if you look at what we heard from his squad mates, they said that, there were intelligence reports immediately that he had sought out the Taliban. Those guys in the field by themselves they don't have a choice. They can't sit here and think about, whether we should treat him as a prodigal son, we should think about him this way, we should love him as much as we can. Their you-know-whats were on the line as they went after him to try to recover him. They can't think of this as theoretical. They heard that he went out and sought out the Taliban. They've got to regard him in that way.
Steve, you and I operate in life as friends, and we got each other's back. But I'm going to tell you something. Those young men are operating in a way that's different than the military. The military never designated Bergdahl as a deserter, AOL, or dishonorable. In fact, he was promoted while he was absent, and he was treated as an American being held as a prisoner of war.
George, you want to get in? Final thought.
Well, I do. We're all accepting the principle that we leave no one behind. But no principle trumps every other consideration. Every principle must have a limiting principle. Now, if these 5 were a proportionate exchange for Mr. Bergdahl, why not 10? Why not 20? What else are we saying? I mean, because if we go to the Taliban and say, absolutely a principle we will not violate, they'll say, well, good, we can ratchet up the price indefinitely.
All right. We have to leave it there, but we are going to continue the conversation. And when we come back, the backlash over the Bergdahl prisoner swap has been bipartisan. Can President Obama sell it as just another phony scandal?
I'm never surprised by controversies that are whipped up in Washington, right? That's par for the course.
President Obama brushing off criticism of the Bergdahl prisoner swap as Washington politics as usual, and we're back now with the panel. George, one of the problems with this controversy is that it's just the latest in a series of issues for this president, starting with the Obamacare website disaster, then all the problems with the way the president handled Ukraine and Putin. We just got out of the VA scandal, and now we have this Bergdahl controversial prisoner swap. And I guess the question is there a cumulative effect here? It's not just one, but one after another that raises questions about the president's competence.
It raises questions about his competence and Democrats' defections from him. But before the 3 crises that you just mentioned, there were 2 others. Last autumn, the president clearly wanted to make Larry Summers the new head of the Fed, and a rebellion among Democrats stopped him. He clearly wanted authorization to use force against Syria, and a rebellion among Democrats stopped him. Now, those are 2 core presidential powers, the appointive power and the war-making power. So this has been a long time coming. There are 5 crises, in effect, going all the way back to late last summer. And it does indicate that Democrats themselves are withdrawing their support from the president, who goes ahead with his own agendas, the EPA rules this week that complicate matters for a number of Democrats seeking re-election. I don't think I've seen worse relations between a White House and Congress since the late Carter years.
On the other hand, the polls so far are pretty evenly split on the Bergdahl release as to whether people approve or disapprove of it, which raises the question, Mara, Is it possible that folks here in Washington are overestimating, given how war-weary the country is, whether they're going to be outraged about anything that seems to move us a little bit closer to the exit in Afghanistan?
I think there's no evidence yet that this is going to affect individual Senate races. Now, will it remind the Republican base of all the reasons they don't like President Obama? Yes, and they're pretty energized to begin with. But I do think there is a risk for Republicans here. They can veer into right-wing political correctness when they talk about impeachment, when they talk about the father's beard, as Juan mentioned. He looks like a lot of bikers in Idaho to me. I mean, to say that somehow that means he's a Muslim or Islamic sympathizer, when they question whether he should be, Bergdahl should have been searched for and released at all. So I think there is a risk there, but I think it definitely hurts the president. He's already, in trouble this election year, but as a determinative factor in Senate races around the country, I don't think so.
Then there is Hillary Clinton, who is now beginning the big offensive. You thought D-Day was big. This is the rollout of her new book, Hard Choices, and it turns out that she did oppose an earlier swap for Bergdahl, and there have been leaks from the book. Her camp has leaked that in the book she says she knew opening the door to negotiations with the Taliban would be hard to swallow for many Americans after so many years of war. And here's what she says in her first interview about the book.
One of our values is we bring everybody home off the battlefield the best we can. It doesn't matter how they ended up in a prisoner of war situation.
It doesn't matter?
It does not matter. We bring our people home.
Steve, sort of like, what difference does it make?
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons that this is going to be so challenging for her is she has to answer for all of these things, particularly in the foreign policy and national security arena, where she served with the president for 4 years. So we're going to see her do this delicate dance where she's defending the administration, defending its choices, and at the same time trying to create some distance where these things are going to be politically difficult. I think this will end up being politically very problematic for the president for precisely the opposite reason than the one the president posited. This is not something that was whipped up in Washington. This is something that I think took place, in Afghanistan. We sent back these Guantanamo detainees. I think at a very base level, people who aren't following politics day in and day out are looking at these Guantanamo 5 and saying, why in the world would we do this? And the conflicts that we're hearing within the administration's own story. I mean, the administration went to court to keep one of these 5 in jail at Guantanamo just 3 years ago, because he was such a huge risk, such a risk to U.S. national security, and now they're letting him walk. Those are things you don't have to have a PhD in national security studies to understand. That just doesn't make sense.
Juan, does this mess, and I think we would all agree that it's been a mess this week, does it have any impact either in the 2014 midterms or for Hillary Clinton in 2016?
I think for Mrs. Clinton, she initially, in the book, apparently says that she was opposed to the deal. And then has come to the point where she says she was willing to negotiate because she wanted to get Bergdahl back, and now she says, well, she's supportive of the administration's decision, as you just heard. So for her, I think it's a matter of, I think this fits the title of her book, Hard Choices, right? So, Mrs. Clinton grappling with difficult issues in difficult times. I think that it doesn't have much consequence for her political future. For Democrats, this is interesting because you've heard from Senator Dianne Feinstein in the Congress saying, we were not informed. To Democrats on the Hill this week, they feel like they've been left behind by the administration. They think the administration's not keeping them up to date, not allowing them to prepare for the political fallout that comes with such a controversy. And if that attends to what George was talking about, the EPA decision, to some extent the administration feels they had to make that call. But you can go back to other situations where they just want the administration to communicate with them, to make them feel like they are on the same team. And right now, the administration is so angry at the inaction in Congress and the fact that House Republicans are able to block, obstruct, however you want to describe it, so much activity, that they tend to turn away and say, we're just going to be about our business, and if the Congress wants to sit there as an impediment to any action, let the American people judge them.
Well, one quick point, and we have only about 30 seconds left, George, and that is the president's approval rating is a huge factor in a midterm. In the 6th year of a 2-term president since 1946, if the president's approval rating is over 50%, his party loses 14 seats in the House. If it's under 50%, they lose 36 seats. So anything that contributes to people not feeling good about Obama could also or Democrats?
Numerous Democrats seeking election to the Senate this year are being required to run 5 to 8 points ahead of the president's job approval. Very difficult.
Thank you, panel. See you next week. Up next, words of wisdom for the class of 2014 from our Power Players of the Week.